Hi, and welcome to Energy Today podcast. So what would Aristotle have to do with extended reach drilling in Shale or in the Permian? Let's find out. So the title of this podcast is The Ethics of Extended Reach Drilling. And while that may sound like a far-fetched concept or far-fetched idea, just stay with me for a little bit and I think you'll get an idea where I'm headed with this. The other title to this could have been, is extended reach drilling a $125 billion mistake in U.S. shale just for 2022. It's a pretty significant concept, pretty significant subject, and here's where it starts. So where could Aristotle tie into extended reach drilling in oil and gas? It has to do with ethics. So the definition of ethics, according to the Oxford Dictionary, is the moral principles that govern a person's behavior or conducting an activity. Is there morality in oil and gas and extended reach drilling in particular? Most people wouldn't see any correlation, but let me take a shot at this and see where we go with it. I'm going to quote YouTube in one of their meetings that they had where they were discussing potential problems or mistakes that they might make. And what YouTube said basically is that if we make a mistake, we make it to scale. In other words, YouTube, I think, is now the number 2 search engine in the world, billions of users. So if they make a mistake, it's a big mistake. How does that correlate to the U.S. shale industry? I was kind of blown away by these numbers, but according to what the estimates are, and I think it's going to be higher now that oil prices have jumped, it was expected that the U.S. shale industry will drill 50 million feet of lateral in zone in 2022. That's a massive amount. It's also a massive amount of probably what is the best acreage, prime acreage to be drilled in the Permian and in a few other basins in Western Canada as well. Their drilling count is quite high there right now as well. So let's assume that they get everything right. That's really significant. But let's assume that maybe everything doesn't go right. Maybe the best decisions aren't made. Now we're talking about mistakes that are made to scale. Okay, so how could this be interpreted to have anything to do with extended reach drilling? It's pretty quick if you do the math. And so I'll give a quote from from Richard Spears. The trend is pretty much everybody is going to extended reach drilling. So originally a lateral would be a mile, about 5,000 feet. Over a period of years, that length began to change. I think it started significantly in the Bakken in North Dakota, where 2-mile laterals became, something that was significant from a drilling standpoint and well construction standpoint. Now, if you go to the Permian, you can go to any investor's report. Here's some examples: Oventus, Oxy. They're all heading toward 10,000 foot laterals as their standard, and then some of these guys are going to be drilling 50 wells with 15,000 foot laterals. Okay, so why would that even matter? Here's some of the math that came originally from the Bakken. I've tried to kind of confirm it in more recent publications, and I've been able to tag on a bit more on this, but a lot of the detailed well information is clouded. We'll get into that at the end as to why this isn't a real clear decision that can be made. Okay, in a recent article, Richard Spears from Spears and Associates quoted as follows: increasingly, laterals seem to come in two sizes, 10,000 and 15,000 feet. On a recent research trip to Midland to meet with drillers, Richard Spears, Vice President of Spears and Associates, an oil field marketing data firm, said he heard so much about the cost advantages of 15,000 foot laterals that he had to ask, why would anyone drill shorter ones? Okay, seems pretty simple, lower cost, but is there a second part to this story? And I think that there is, and it is what happens to recoveries on the first mile. You know, you can certainly optimize those proppant loading and proppant placement, that kind of stuff. Second mile becomes a little more of a question. Third mile, I think, becomes a really, really big question for the following. The article goes on further to say it talks about property swapping to be able to consolidate and to get to long laterals. The good news is that it's a win-win for both parties. Everybody wants to be able to drill long laterals where they have a bigger interest in their own operations. But I mean, really, is it just two parties that are involved in whether this is a good decision or not? And I think this is where we get into kind of an ethical dilemma, or at least an ethical discussion, depending on kind of your point of view. Who are the parties involved in these wells? Is it just one operator swapping properties with another one to drill an extended reach lateral? I don't think that's kind of where it ends, because there is also the landowner, the leaseholder. There is the general public. If we're doing something that's going to leave reserves behind, maybe to a massive factor, maybe on scale, should that be a consideration? You know, the state, the provincial governments in Canada, they all have a vested interest in making sure recoveries are as high as they possibly can be. And it would be my contention that extended reach laterals has a very compromising factor in what's about to happen. And when I get to the math at the end, I think you'll get an idea where this really needs to be a discussion really on a bigger scale than it is currently. As I say, if you go into investor presentations, I could take you through almost everyone in the Permian and in North Dakota, and they're talking about extended reach laterals being 10,000 foot laterals, and the potential for 2022 is lots of 15,000 foot laterals. So if our recovery factors on the second mile and third mile are lower, and maybe significantly lower, that is potentially a massive scale mistake, especially, as I say, we're drilling up the core acreage. I looked at some of the production from the Eagle Ford, where core acreage was much smaller than had been anticipated, and I was shocked to find out that almost 80% of the wells are below 15 barrels a day. Regardless of the math, is recovery being maximized with extended reach laterals? So here we go. Let's get into kind of the basics of the definition. Okay, so if we look at the numbers, and we're going to do 50 million lateral feet in 2022 in the US, probably more with higher oil prices, and then you add in Canada, that'll be an additional amount. So what that comes to basically is 50 million feet of laterals, but 25 million will be at 100% recovery, whatever the recovery factor is. The next 25 million is going to be at some reduced number. So if the numbers stand true to what we saw in North Dakota early on, where nothing really was changing other than the feet of lateral, it could be that recovery factor is reduced by 50%. It's certainly going to be reduced by some number. And the third mile probably, you know, a little bit higher. But if you do that, then what we're saying is 25 million feet of laterals at full recovery, and potentially 25 at some reduced recovery, maybe as low as 50%. So if we go through the numbers, then what it means basically is if you assumed 100,000 barrels per 1,000 foot of lateral, then what we are essentially doing if we do extended reach laterals is we're going to leave 1.25 billion barrels of oil behind just in the drilling we're doing in 2022, which is likely some of the best acreage. Now, to me, this is a bit of an ethical dilemma. And if you left 1.25 billion barrels of oil behind in 2022 by doing this more efficient extended reach drilling, then essentially that's $125 billion in revenue. Now, I understand that's not $125 billion in profit, because if we developed everything with 1 mile laterals, then obviously the cost would be higher. There'd be a lot of other factors to consider. Okay, so I'm going to stop this segment at this point in time, but I think that when you look at extended reach laterals and the potential for leaving reserves behind, it's significant. And if it is a mistake, it'll be made to scale with 50 million feet of lateral being drilled. On the next podcast, which I hope to release pretty much right after this one, I'm going to talk about some of the other challenges, why we don't have better information, problems with the Railroad Commission, Corporation Commission, all the oil and gas regulating, and then what we do know. So there is some question as to whether the loss of production is going to be 50% on the second 5,000 feet, 50% on the third, or will it be some other number? But certainly there'll be less recovery on the second mile of lateral, third mile. I promise you that's probably going to be in that 50% range. But I'll get into some of the details, some of the technical issues, and some of the problems long term that these extended reach laterals are going to produce, and no hope for anything in addition beyond that. So anyway, thanks for watching the Energy Today podcast. I think this is a hugely significant subject, especially when you look at Aramco's getting ready to spend $10 billion. UAE is starting on a shale project. Oman is heavily influenced by what's going on in the US, and Argentina as well. So that's it for today. Next session, we'll get into some of the technical issues, some of the other challenges that we face with shale, and is it an ethical dilemma to do extended reach laterals?